Welcome back to Luther Souls Woven in Time by Dugan. I'm here by myself. Actually, I'm not by myself, but I'm the only one on the camera today. Um, Last week, I told about my grandmother Johnson. So I think this week, I'll tell about my granddaddy Johnson. I've got one of the reasons I got this hat on today is because it's the closest thing I've got to the type hat that my granddaddy Johnson wore. My granddaddy Johnson, I don't seldom ever I ever saw my granddaddy outside without his hat on. And his hat was a little bit wider brim than this is, and it was always kind of a gray, almost blue, a bluish gray hat. It was always the same hat. He always had at least two. He had a work hat, and then he had his Sunday hat, but they were the same hat. I guess he has was the same kind of hat um, when he'd buy a new hat. His old hat went to a work hat. I wish I'd have saved some of those hats, but I don't know whatever happened to him. But because I can sit here and talk about it now, I can smell those hats and see the sweat marks on those, especially the ones he wore as his work hats, because he would work in the mill with them, and he'd also work out in the fields with him when he was working in his fields. Um, but I'm gonna go back to some of the first memories I have, and um, not necessarily in chronological order, because as a young child, I'm not sure which took place first. But one of the things, I was talking to my cousin about it the other day, and she remembers him being down on the floor with her. She's 10 months younger than me. She can remember him getting down on the floor and playing with us, but I can remember him getting down on all fours and and me riding on his back. He was my horsey, and I'd get on it. He'd crawl around the living room and give me a ride. I guess as long as I wanted him to. I was happy when he was doing that anyway. And this had to have been when I was pretty young, 4 or 5 or younger. Another thing in the early days, and this is when Denny Road was paved in 1953. Denny Road was a road that my granddaddy and grandmother lived on, and it was a graveled road when I first remember it, and it was paved in 1953. And I can remember walking um, to Mr. Herbin's house with my granddaddy Johnson. Now, Mr. Herbin was his youngest daughter's father-in-law, and Miss Herbin. Um, but they lived down Denny Road, I guess to the west of where my grandmother and granddaddy lived. And it was within walking distance, which back then a lot of things were in walking distance. Walking was a mode of transportation for a good number of people back then. But we would walk, and I can remember when it was a graveled road. I don't remember if I was barefooted or not, because a lot of times I was, but I don't remember particularly whether I was barefooted. But I remember walking over there and trying to stay in Granddaddy's shadow. And I just thought, I don't know, I just thought it was pretty cool. I guess the one word description of my Granddaddy Johnson was he was a righteous man. He was a good person. He was quiet spoken. Um, he was, I guess, the idyllic type grandfather to me. But I love to walk and would walk over there. I don't remember any conversations or anything. I just remember walking over there with him and trying to stay in his shadows. Uh, he always wore, when he was working, he always wore bibbed overalls. And I remember too, on the weekends, he would wear uh, slacks and a white shirt. Sundays, he'd have a tie on and a jacket. but almost always when he had, since I can remember, not always maybe, but enough times it made an impression on me. Granddaddy dipped snuff. He smoked a little bit too, but he dipped snuff and chewed tobacco. But he would dip snuff, and on his white shirts, on the front of his white shirts, you could see little splatters of snuff that'd come out of his mouth, drip down his chin, and get on his white shirt. And that was kind of a trademark for him all from the first time I remember my granddaddy to then. But he was like I say, probably righteous is the best word, and the memories I have of him are so precious to me. Um, some of the things that he taught me, him and Mr. Herbin built a church over on Mr. Herbin's property. Um, I don't know how much Granddaddy had to do with the church itself, um, but he had a lot to do with building it. I don't know how much. I think Granddaddy had some financial obligations to it. I'm not sure, but he was very conscientious in helping Mr. Jordan, Mr. Jordan, Mr. Herbin build that church, and we used to go over. Um, we would go over to walk over there to the house. Sometimes Fay Baby would go with me too. My double first cousin that's 10 months younger than me. She would she would go. She'd walk over there with us. But I learned about leverage when Granddaddy was working on him, working on this church with him, and because I guess I had my own hammer, probably one that he had gotten out of his toolbox, and I took over there with me.
How old were you?
And well, this had to have started when I was probably 5 years old, and went on to 6 or 7. Um, the the Moore family lived almost directly across the road in front of the Herbins, and James Moore. Um, James is 2 years older than me, and James has told me he remembered his daddy had a big truck. His dad was in the concrete finishing business, and his daddy had some trucks. And he said his dad helped Mr. Herbin move some of the. There's a community called McAdoo Heights between where we lived in the city of Greensboro, and they had torn a church down over there, and that's where Mr. Herbin got all the timbers and even the bricks. And I didn't know this until James told me a year or two ago. He said he remembered him and his older brothers and probably a sister or two also, sitting over there and knocking concrete off a brick where they'd gotten the brick. His dad had brought truckloads of bricks over there and dumped them. And he said the kids would go over there and just knock concrete off the bricks for Mr. Herbin to build the foundation of that church. And I would go over with Granddaddy, and the timbers out of that church was used. A lot of it was used in Mr. Herbin's church, the one that him and Granddaddy was building. And I learned about leverage. I had my hammer, and Granddaddy would always, he took the time to show me when I'm pulling nails to pull at the top of the hammer or at the end of the handle of it. And then he taught me too that same thing with the crowbar, because some of these were big beams that we were pulling nails out of, and probably as much as 6 inch by 6 inch timbers. And he showed me how to use a crowbar, and always use the end to get more leverage. That way you had more strength to pull it out. Showed me how to keep from bending the nail. Sometimes he'd put another board up under the crowbar. You get the nail out a little ways, then you build it up a little bit, keep from bending it and getting it out. And we even would straighten nails out and use them again, and that we pulled out of there, we'd use them again. And there was just a lot that I learned from my granddaddy walking back and forth. Um, two, about this time, Granddaddy he was a truck farmer. He worked in the cotton mill on the second shift ever since I could remember. But he was also a truck farmer. He had several acres, and he had two big old fields. Actually, he had three pretty good sized fields. He'd grow wheat about every other year. He'd grow wheat and grow a lot of corn, potatoes, any type of truck farming. And he had a sled, and his horse's name was Sandy. And Faye and I used to love to go down there when he was um, working in the fields if he was using the sled. I found out years later that sled wasn't nearly as much fun as I got older as I thought it was when I was little, because it was just two or three 2x8s, maybe 2x6s, probably 2x8s, turned on the side and cut at an angle at the front where they'd slide over roots or rocks or whatever. And he just took Sandy up to it. And so every time the thing would, the every time Sandy would take a step, we just
kind of surged.
Yeah, we'd surge forward and then stop, surge and stop, surge. So our head was going like this constantly. But I didn't realize that when I was little. It was just fun. Because he'd put baskets on there. I remember digging sweet potatoes over there, all kinds of stuff. We'd go over there to harvest stuff in that back field, and it was just so much easier to get it back because it was on the back side of the pasture from the house. So he'd hook the sled up, and sometimes even when he was plowing, he'd put a couple plows on the sled, take it over there, and he'd just work, and I'd play around the field while he was setting rows, or maybe even just turning it, because sometimes he would turn it with Sandy. But anytime I could ride that sled, I loved it. I don't remember when Grandmother and Granddaddy got a toilet in their house, but I do remember that we didn't have an inside toilet when we moved out there on Mizell Road up behind him. And after we were there, not long, I don't guess, my dad and I believe, I'm not sure, it seemed like somebody else helped Dad, but I'm not sure. Maybe even Jesse McCraw, but Jesse wasn't living out there then, but he'd come and visit once in a while. But anyway, Dad got a toilet hole dug to set us a privy down. It was down on the back side of the smokehouse before you got to the pasture. And I remember one Saturday morning, we got ready and we went down to Granddaddy Johnson's, and my Uncle Luke was there. Uncle Luther Johnson. He was the one that I was named after. He was a pretty special guy too. I want to tell you more about him because he was special in my life. Had a lot of good influences in my life. But he was there, and me and Dad, and I guess my brother Bub was there. He says he don't remember this. So I don't know if he was there or not, but I'm almost sure he was. But Grandmother and Granddaddy's toilet, I don't ever remember them using their outside toilet because they'd closed in part of their back porch and made a bathroom in the house. And that's the only bathroom I remember using at Grandmother and Granddaddy's house. But I do remember when it was new. But we Granddaddy went down, hooked Sandy up to the sled, and pulled the sled up to behind the toilet. Him and Daddy and Luke got the sled adjusted where they wanted it, and Sandy stood still, and they just pushed the toilet over. They just pushed it over on the sled, and here we go. Daddy and Luke, and I guess, gets in the car, and they go back up to the house, and me and Granddaddy. I think I don't think Granddaddy seldom ever rode the sled, but I would ride the sled, and he um, he went around the road and took the took it up there. Then we just kind of rolled the toilet or the part of the house part of the outhouse. We just rolled it off the sled and turned around and went back down to Grandmother and Granddaddy's. And the floor and the toilet stool, I guess you would call it, was all made of concrete in that one. And so we went back down there and they lifted that thing up and just turned it over on the sled, and here we go again, me and Granddaddy riding the sled. So we get back up there and they managed to get it off. And I'm sure I helped because I'm every bit of 6 or 7 by that time. So I may have been supervising, I don't know. But anyway, um, we got the house floor set over the hole, and then they just set the house back up over the floor and the stool. So we had our little privy there. And we probably used it for a couple of years. Little boys, me and my brother, we didn't use it very much at all because we'd just run out in the woods somewhere because there's plenty of woods around us. We'd just run out in the woods where nobody could see us and use it. But that was an incident that happened that was pretty big at the time. It was important to me at the time, maybe and probably just because I got to ride the sled so much.
Now, were they relocating the outhouse to use in another part?
Yeah, they moved it to our house.
Oh, okay.
They
I
moved it
part.
from
Sorry.
Granddaddy's house up to our house.
Gotcha. All right, sorry.
And I don't know what happened to that because by the time we got it, there wasn't many people that didn't have inside plumbing because Uncle Herb and Matt Bob, they had inside plumbing. Luke and Norma, I think across the road, there was inside plumbing there. So I don't know whatever happened to that, but that was pretty impressive. The floor, because it was all one molded concrete thing, and it was only a 1-seater. Now my granddaddy Sewell, they had a 2-seater toilet.
Wow.
We'll talk about that when I talk about my granddaddy and grandmother Sewell. But I used to love to ride that sled, and granddaddy helped me. He just taught me about doing things, and he was I don't ever remember him calling me by my name, whether it was Josh or Dugan or Luther. Maybe the only thing he knew me as was son, because that's the one name that I remember him calling me was son, do this, and son, do that, or son, do you want to do this? He didn't tell you much. It was always, do you want to? He was such a gentleman and as time went by, I realized my mom had Bob, Ruby, and Hinky had three sisters, and all 4 of those girls, they worshiped their daddy. There wasn't nothing like their daddy to them. And so I can't say this with any kind of authority, but I think he was probably a pretty good daddy. I know he was a wonderful granddad to me. He also was a carpenter. It was interesting as a little boy. I'm talking 6, 7, 8 years old when we would on over probably less than another quarter mile from Mr. Urban's house. There was a Floyd Setzer owned a country store service station there, and there were other people that ran the store after Floyd. He finally quit running it himself and he rented it out to people to use. But I'd walk over there with Granddaddy sometime, and I'd hear him talking. And Mr. Johnson, Ed Johnson, he had a reputation of being able to lay out a house. He could lay a house out and square it up with just nothing but his eyesight and some wood, some stakes, and some some twine, some string. And I remember, I remember him, and I was a little boy, I don't remember any details, but I remember he laid the house out, that him and my dad laid the house that we built there on Mizell Road. I remember him laying it out. Um, I remember Mom picked it out. It was back off the road further than anybody else's house on that road, and still to this day, it's the biggest front yard on that house. I mean, on that road. And but I remember Mom. She wanted, if I'm not mistaken, it was. I know it was one of the rear corners, and I think it was the corner to the southwest, the back corner, southwest side. The house faced east, and I think it was the back corner on the southwest that this is where I want it, Dad, because I remember her and I mean my dad and my granddaddy. It seems like, I'm not sure, but it seems like to me that they tried to convince Mom to move the house closer to the road, but she, no, this is where I wanted this. And time proved that my mom was right, because she had a beautiful, beautiful yard there, and it's still beautiful to this day. Trees are a lot bigger. I think there's a few less trees in there, but they're just beautiful oak trees. Uh, but I remember him and Dad driving some 2x4s, I guess they were, some stobs in the ground in an L shape, and he drove nails in the boards, and he twisted them, tied it on to the nails in the top of the boards, and he'd pull them, and then him and Dad would look, and he'd move it to the right or the left, or he may have had a carpenter square too that he would use to square the corners up. I'm not sure, but pretty much his eyesight and maybe a carpenter square that he would use, and he'd lay a house off. And I've heard people talk when we'd go over to Floyd Setzer's store. I've heard people talk about if you want to lay a house off, you building a house, you want to lay it off, get Ed Johnson to lay it off for you, because he can lay a house off. And I was just a little boy there, and I didn't even at that time I didn't know what laying a house off meant. Um, but it's kind of made me feel good that my granddaddy was that good. And even though I didn't know what it was, I knew he was better than most people at it. But I learned a word from my granddaddy. I don't know when I never didn't know the meaning of this word. But in working with him, I remember at least two houses I helped him build. Um, and I use the term helped loosely. Um, but he built a house, a rental. Well, he had two rental houses that he had, and then he built a house for one of my mom's youngest brother, and then he built a house just beyond our house. He built it and sold it, and he contracted some of that work out on the house that he sold, but he did a lot of it himself. But the word "took here," I never questioned what that word meant. Took here. Took here in my granddaddy's vocabulary was excuse me, or watch out, or get out of my way. You're about to get hit. But it was I don't know where it came from, but I never didn't know if I was helping my granddaddy do something, whether it was farming, on the sled, or helping him pick up potatoes, put in a bushel basket or what. When Granddaddy said "took here," I knew that I better watch out, because I was in his way doing something. But "took here" meant excuse me, or watch out, or whatever. Never heard anybody else, not even in our family, use that term. But I always knew what it meant when Granddaddy said "took here." I knew that "took here" meant watch out, son, you're gonna get hit if you don't. Um, but um, I remember, I remember too um, when my grandmother died in January, and this. I'm getting to the sad part now, toward the end of my granddad's life. When my grandmother died in January of 1964. My grandfather died that next December. But I remember in the spring, not long after grandmother died, I went down there one day and in the evening, and he was out in the backyard, and he says, I said, Granddaddy, I said, who's been down here lately? Nobody. And I said, you hadn't seen whoever, Gravy, Bob, Uncle Herb, Daddy, Mom. And he said, and I said, Luke hadn't even been down here. And he said, son, he said, since your grandmother's gone, nobody comes down here. And that just struck me. I was, what, 19 years old at the time? But that hurt. That saddened me even then. I remember another time, um, we lived probably a little less than a quarter of a mile up Mizell Road, which was a dirt road or gravel road. And I remember um, I heard sirens sound like an ambulance, and it stopped on Granddaddy's side where Mizell Road or Denny Road and Mizell Road intersected. Granddaddy lived just a little bit east of Mizell Road, and that's where it sounded like the ambulance stopped. And I took off running down that road because it hadn't been long since I lost my grandmother to death, and that was the first time I'd ever lost anybody in death. And I took off running, and I get down there, and there was a car accident between Granddaddy's house and Mizell Road, and he was standing there. He had already walked up to where the accident was, and he didn't say anything. I don't ever remember my granddad ever complaining to me or about anything. Uh, but I couldn't keep my hands off of him, so I was so glad to see that he was okay. And I said, "Oh, Granddaddy," I said, "I'm glad you're not hurt." I said, "I was worried about you," and it was like, "Son, just settle down. We've been so silly." He didn't say that, but it was like, just he'd take my hands and kind of push them away. He, well, his generation, they just weren't used to that type of men touching men. That wasn't supposed to be done. And but I remember that. Uh, but I remember the time when I asked him, I said, Luke hadn't been down here? He said, son, nobody comes down here since your grandmother's gone. And that hurt my feelings. But I will say, not long after that, I must have told mom and dad about it because my dad, and I'll tell you more about this one when I talk another one. But my dad got to work every day. Dad worked the second shift too, and he would go see my granddaddy every afternoon before he'd go to work. He'd stop by my granddaddy's house. He did that for months before my granddaddy died. Um, I'm sure there's things that I'll tell you more about my granddaddy as time goes on. I think about it, but he was a great, great man, and I loved him dearly. And he was just one of the many, many people that nurtured me in my life. Um, I don't have a poem about granddaddies either. Um, maybe I'll write one. But for right now, I'm going to bring this to an end. And you guys be pretty and like and subscribe and let me know. Let me know what I can do to increase viewership, and improve your enjoyment to what I'm doing. But for right now, be pretty and goodbye.